Welcome back to another 2024 Grand Prix preview with your Turn 1 host, Jeremiah.
And Thomas.
We're going over the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, otherwise known as Imola.
The other Italian Grand Prix. The one that comes first every year and everybody's kind of confused because it's not Monza, but they think it might be Monza.
What's cool about this Grand Prix is that it was kind of just like a one-off, just because of COVID and how all the different tracks were canceled, and they just kind of kept it.
Yeah, and we can actually get to this now, I guess, before we look at what we're going to do is we're going to go back through 2022. We'll look at the track. We'll give our predictions and a wild card. Stick around for the wild card, by the way, because I have one that I think is really going to throw Jeremiah off and maybe some of y'all, but it's going to come true. So stick around. But yeah, so this race, they ran it from 1980 to 2006, just like a normal Grand Prix. It was the Emilia Romagna that, made it happen, all that. Then it went away. The track had deteriorated. It wasn't up to F1 standard. So 2006, it left. And then you're right. COVID came around in 2020. A bunch of races couldn't happen. And they were like, hey, we fixed some stuff. You can come here. Please come race at our track again. and F1 looked at it and they said, you know what? Yeah, you have. So they brought it back in 2020. And then you're right. It just kind of stayed. They were like, oh, China's canceled in 2021. Let's replace it with this one. Oh, you just magically got on the 2022 calendar as well? Okay, we'll sign a 4-year deal with you through 2025. Let's just do that then. So yeah, interesting how it came around. I went back through and I watched the shortened version of the 2022 race because do you remember what happened in 2023, why it wasn't on the calendar?
Just a giant flood, wasn't it?
Yeah. It
like
just rained.
A massive flood going on.
They said that the paddock was like underwater. They couldn't.
God.
They could do it. And the crazy thing is, we've watched so many F1 races where rain and water just takes over the environment. Like think of Monaco when that thing floods. This was worse than that. Like they couldn't do anything, so they had to cancel it. So let's go back to 2022. What's one or two things you remember from that race?
I remember a lot of rain and Carlos Sainz and Daniel Ricciardo going flying into the sand.
Yeah, very early on. This was back. Okay, a lot has changed since 2022. It doesn't feel like a long time ago, but a lot has changed. Let me take you through some of the changes. One, this is back when the sprint race determined the starting grid for the Grand Prix race. We don't do it that way anymore. But we did back in 2022. So they had a sprint for this race, and it determined the starting grid. McLaren was decent at the time. Do you know the McLaren driver lineup in 2022?
Oh, yeah. It was Lando and Ricciardo.
Lando and Ricciardo. If you're just coming into the season, into F1 last season or this season, yeah, Danny Rick was at McLaren not too long ago.
Yeah.
It was not always a Lando and Oscar show. Fernando Alonso was in his last season with Alpine. I feel like he's been with Aston Martin for forever already, but he hasn't. 2 years.
Yeah, and the craziest thing is that before Aston Martin, he was at Alpine for ages. Even though he would go away from the team and come back, oh, now we're Renault. Oh, now we're Alpine. It's the same team. And he's been there forever. And
another little twist is that Mercedes was struggling.
This was in their time. The Zero Pods?
This was the year of the Zero Pods.
Okay.
And they still didn't have it figured out this early in the season because this race is always kind of ran in the first 10 or so races of the year. And they were down in the pack. So looking at the race, you did have the rain, which Jeremiah mentioned that they covered. Fun little fact here. They really messed up some of the drivers because they installed a new strip of asphalt. Did you read about this? They installed a new strip of asphalt on the inside lane of the track. And so everybody that was starting in even grid place positions started terribly because the brand new asphalt was so slick compared to the old worn down asphalt in the rain. And if you watch the start of the race, everybody on the left side of the track, if you're looking down at it, just gets blown by the people on the other side. And that included Charles Leclerc, who was in second place. Turns 3 and 4, I believe, are where you mentioned Ricardo and Sainz get taken off. I think that was blamed on Ricardo ultimately, but correct me if I'm wrong.
It was blamed on Ricardo, but if you go back and watch it, he actually gets slapped by an Alfa Romeo from behind, and it could have been just that Ricardo got on the brakes too aggressively, and the Alfa couldn't slow down. But the Alfa does tap Ricardo in the back, and then Ricardo takes out Sainz ultimately. But I think it was blamed on Ricardo on that one.
Later on in the race, you see Lewis Hamilton flying by Fernando Alonso, and you're like, whoa, that Mercedes isn't as fast as that Alpine, or they're pretty even. Then you look at the side of Fernando Alonso's car, and he's just missing an entire side pod. So
you see Fernando coming into the pits. How bad is the damage? Well,
bad. It's quite bad. Like I thought his performance wasn't too bad, because if I remember, he ran for like a good lap or two, missing that side pod, and I guess he thought it was okay enough to continue until he went into the pit. Like he didn't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like as a driver, you ultimately know, but you're like, is it something we can save with a quick little change in the pits? And that's what his real question was, not really how bad is the damage.
Right.
I think he knows how slow he's lapping.
Now, the other thing was, this was still when Ferrari was a little bit competitive with Red Bull. And so they ultimately proved faster than McLaren throughout the race, even though McLaren qualified kind of high. This was also peak George Russell back in 2022 during
Mr.
this race.
Consistency.
Dude, he worked his way through that pack so methodically, moving up, getting moves done. He ultimately finished in 4th after he started down in like 11th or something like that. So yeah, he was cooking throughout the day. And then my final note on the 2022 race was Leclerc was in 2nd or 3rd at the time towards the end of the race, and he was cutting corners, and he hits the sausage curb at the chicane between 14 and 15, flies into the wall, but he's able to recover it and pull it back onto the track. So he had no reason to do that, but he did.
Just trying to get an advantage anywhere you can.
Let's move into the 2024 track. Walk me through some of your ins and outs of this track, and I'll give you mine.
I don't know what iterations, I guess, that they've done to it since then, but one of the things that I love about this track, first of all, it starts off with this kinked straight, which, you stay to the right, and then ultimately it has these weird quick left right kinks all through the entire track. I love it. I mean, you look at turns 2, 3, 4, you look at 5 and 6, you look at as you go further down, you look at this almost I guess you could call it like a Monza style kink, but a little elongated at 14 and 15. But I guess I'll take you for a lap around it because I'm jumping around here. But as you go through the first kink, I guess you can consider it a turn. It's really just a slight right, but you're going down this long straight. Then you immediately have to throw it left and right as you're going through 3 and 4, or 2 and 3. Then you come up to 4, and it's a slight left as you go down a long straight coming towards 5 and 6. 5 and 6, once again, harsh left right kink. You go up to, as you get up to 7, you've got a hairpin. And when you're going through 7, you go this mild straight and then a slight curvature at 8, which I guess, once again, I guess it's considered a turn. It's really not. 9, you've got this harsh left-hander. It's almost 90 degrees. You go through, I guess, another slight kink. They have a lot of turns on this track, I'm just now noticing. I don't know why I never noticed this. That really shouldn't be a turn. It's more like a slight curve. But be that as it may, 11, 12, and 13 is this weird. I mean, you come in, you slight left turn, and then you throw it to the right, or slight right turn, then you throw it to the right as you climb this hill going into 13, and then a long straight up to the 14, 15 Monza style chicane that I was telling you about. Throw it to the right, then quickly back to the left, and you've got this long straight up to 16 and 17. 17 and 18 is this double apex, but it's a little shortened, so you don't get to really get the full. I mean, you have to ride the track on the far right side, but for it to be a double apex, you really need more track there. So it ultimately ends up just being like 2 separate turns. You go through 18, you flying down 19, and then back up on the start finish line at 1.
So before you did the full track walkthrough, you mentioned a couple of areas of the track that you liked. You said you liked 2, 3, and 4. You said you liked 14 and 15. Those are the only changes this track has ever had.
What do you mean only changes?
So this is the original layout of the track since 1953. The only thing they've added are those chicanes that
Oh,
you
imagine
mentioned.
that.
I think as F1 got faster and things got more dangerous,
Well, they
which
had to slow it down.
specifically there at 2, 3, and 4, that used to be the Tamburello curve, which was a flat out left turn. So go from turn 1 today to turn 5 as a flat out left banking turn.
Jeez, so it's
And
almost like
apparently
this
that got
130R
really
kinda
dangerous.
thing?
Yeah, that got really dangerous really fast. They had a couple of instances there, some of them very notable. They include Ayrton Senna and Ronald Ratzenberger. And so
Right.
that is why they edited the track to be the modern day version, which has several chicanes that are intended to slow drivers down and not, as Charles Leclerc did, jump over curbs to try to cut the track and make it a straight shot. So I found that pretty interesting. This is one of the only tracks I think that we've seen that has had relatively few changes. Most of the tracks have had major layout changes. Like they look nothing like their original versions. This one looks pretty much like the original version. Good.
I completely forgot that this is the track of Ayrton Senna. So you saying that is just bringing back everything that we ever did research on about himself and his career in this track and everything. And you're right, it's all coming back to me. This track was just wild straights, just full out speed.
Because they would go around that I want to make sure I get the name. It was the Tamburello curve. They would go around it at like 200 miles an hour.
Yeah, that's
And even
right.
without water on the track like we've had the past couple of years, it was super dangerous, and they would fly off the track into a concrete wall at 200 miles an hour.
That
So
is ridiculous.
they fixed it as best they could, at least. The only other note I have on this track of things that I'm indifferent. I don't know if I like these or not, and maybe you could talk me one way or the other. I feel like this track has a ton of gravel traps. Am I wrong or right on that?
Uh, it does, but it's just because of the style or the way that the track is built. So what would you prefer to see there? Would you prefer to see like concrete runoffs with the stripes, or would you prefer to see grass? I mean, what are you looking at?
So here's the thing why I mentioned gravel traps specifically, because every racetrack has runoff areas and all that, but usually they're concrete or grass or something that a driver can recover from. Just like we saw in 2022 with Carlos Sainz, if you get spun the wrong way into a gravel trap and you stop moving, your race is done. No other runoff area takes you out of a race like gravel traps do.
I think it's one of the things where you take the good with the bad. So the reason why they have it probably set up that way is because of such a dangerous history of this place. They probably have all of the gravel traps instead of the concrete runoff, just because of the sheer and simple fact that you're flying around this track, and if you get off, you need to stop.
I wonder if they've ever had discussions. The French track, the Paul Ricard circuit.
Mhm.
They have those giant blue, red, and white striped runoff areas that everybody's like, oh, they do that. So it's like an aesthetic thing. Looks like the French flag. It's an aesthetic thing that's covering up a functional aspect of the track.
Right.
Those blue, red, and white stripes are different level of abrasives on the track. And so when a driver slides off, they slow the driver down. And the further you get away from the track, the more aggressive that abrasive is, and it brings your car to a stop because the tires are essentially digging into sandpaper at that point. I wonder if they would ever go that route at Monza or at Imola, only because, again, a driver on lap one that gets pushed off the track and has their car stopped because they need to turn around, their race is over. Even though any other race in the sport, they would be fine to just get back on the track and keep going.
I don't know if you could. And the reason I say that is because if you think of Paul Ricard, it's a circuit that where the walls are like way over there and way over there. But if you're
Yeah.
going around a lap of Imola, I mean, it's not like a street circuit close, but the walls aren't that far away.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, that's why I'm kind of neutral on the gravel traps. I know they have a purpose. It is a game-changing aspect to this track. You don't want to go off in the wrong spot or your race is over. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, their race is over. Like that's not.
Yeah, well, I mean, you don't mess up.
Well, if you're Carlos Sainz and you get shoved off by Danny Rick, it's not messing up.
Make sure nobody else messes up.
But the difference was Daniel Ricciardo was able to keep driving forward because his car was facing
Right.
forward, and as long as you can keep going, you can get out. Carlos Sainz was spun around backwards. The second he whipped around backwards, he stopped moving. You're stuck.
Yeah, I mean, it is the only bad part about. And then of course they got to bring out a safety car. They got to bring out the crane, get the
Yep.
car off out of the
Because
sand.
you can't push it out of the gravel trap.
No.
Could you imagine? 1, 2, 3, heave!
Right. My calves are burning.
It's just one guy out there trying to push the car.
Jeez.
Okay, let's bring this home with some predictions. I said I kind of had a fiery wild card, so I do want you to go first. Give me, let's do top threes first, and then we'll go back and forth on wild cards. So give me your top three.
So we had the one-off, and it was super fun. Lando Norris taking the win, but I think it's a one-off. I really do. Hopefully, it's something that we see again later on down the season. But I think as it stands, with no damage to the side pod or no, actually it was up underneath. It was the ground effects. With no damage to the spoiler, no damage to the front wing from hitting cones. I'm gonna say Max Verstappen takes this one. Give him back the spot. He's in the one spot. 2, give me Lando Norris because Sergio Perez cannot compete with these McLarens that have found this added pace. And on top of that, Lando has now had an entire race with the new upgrades that they brought. And so I think that he's going to be a lot quicker, a lot more connected with the car. Give me Lando in the second spot and give me Oscar Piastri in the third spot because this is going to be his first race with the upgrades. He didn't have them in Miami. Now he's got them.
That is quite the take. You've got to be real careful around this track. Does Oscar have that kind of patience yet to fight through the mess?
Out of the other drivers, I mean, if you're looking at I mean, I love the guy, but if you're looking at a Kevin Magnussen, far too aggressive for a track like this. If you're looking at a Yuki Tsunoda, far too aggressive for a track like this. I think that Oscar Piastri is more of like a surgeon, and he's more conservative when it comes to his driving style. Give me Oscar Piastri to take that third spot.
Speaking of Kevin Magnussen, real quick, he's now got to go like the next 26 races in a row without receiving a penalty point to keep his super license intact and avoid a race ban.
Because I had this explained to me. Even if he does go the entirety of until February or March of 2025,
March of 25 or something,
without getting another point, it only drops down to like 7. Versus if he just took the penalty, got another point, had a race suspension, couldn't race for that one race, and then he's out for that one race, and then he's back to 0. So
you can't just take a defensive driving course and have it removed from it.
God.
Okay, my top three. Max Verstappen takes the one spot. I mean, it's hard to say that Lando's was a one-off. I think Lando's now going to consistently be top 3, top 4-ish every race, which he wasn't before. But again, I think you're right. I think Max has to struggle for him to get a win. Max has to have a technical issue, has to have damage, has to have a strategy go horribly wrong, a safety car that, Lando got a big boost off that safety car in the race that he won. So some of those things have to fall into place. So give me Max in the one spot. Number 2, give me Lando. I think he's right there at this point in both his career in terms of driver skill and what McLaren is rolling out. McLaren has been dialing in this car since the middle of last season, and they are finally hitting their stride. And I mean, not competing with both Red Bulls, but at least competing with Checo. And then in the third spot, give me Checo. I think this year he's been pretty consistent, finishing in that second spot several times already. So I think finishing in third, now that Lando, I think, has kind of surpassed him a little bit, is perfectly reasonable. I don't think the Ferraris or McLarens are going to crack the code ultimately to get both of them up there like you have Oscar and Lando. Okay, throw me your wild card.
Danny Ricciardo gets points.
All right.
Okay, fine. Danny Ricciardo gets 9th, to be more specific.
That's not going to happen.
Gosh.
I I mean, he's just not. But you know what? It's a wild card, and if it does happen, you'll look like a hero
There you go.
to all the Visa Cash App RB racing fans out there.
I think it's more like the Ricardo fans, but okay.
We're gonna go down to Austin, go to Coda, get our first race. You're gonna spend $300 on a V Carb hoodie. All right, for my wild card, this is about Mercedes.
Oh
Give me
no.
both Mercedes drivers. That includes George Russell, Mr. Consistency, and 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton to finish behind both Ferraris. Okay, fair enough. That's not enough. I get it.
Okay.
Behind both McLarens.
Okay.
Okay, not enough. And Fernando Alonso.
I don't think that's as wild as you think. I really don't. You really aired that one up like it was going to be some heavy hitting thing. If you had said behind both Aston Martins, I would have been like, okay,
no, let's be reasonable. Let's not give Lance Stroll that much now. Now they could split Lance Stroll one way or the other here, but the craziest part about that is, one, they've been finishing ahead of that group, at least one of them, in most of the races. They haven't been behind them all the time. Two, if you throw out that wild card last year or in any season previous to this one, you're getting laughed out of the sport. But right now, your reaction to that tells me all I need to know about Mercedes.
Yeah, and that's tough because I am a Mercedes fan, but I'm also a diehard Alonso fan, so I'm not mad about it.
So you're like, all right, Alonso getting 6, let's go.
Right on. I'm there for it. I thought you were going to say something like, give me both Mercedes out of the points. I was like, geez.
Yeah, no, I could see that. I mean, if I have both Red Bulls, both Ferraris, both McLarens, and Fernando Alonso ahead of you, that's 7 spots.
Yeah.
I mean, really. Now, if you're right about an RB getting a point and maybe a Haas sneaks into the points, maybe. I mean, I think Lewis or George secures a top 10, but it's possible they finish out of the points. They are struggling, and I don't think they have upgrades for this race, do they? I don't know.
I don't know. I haven't heard much from Mercedes.
I haven't seen that. We'll have to look at the practices and see what they roll out. Okay, let us know in the comments. Give us your top 3 and a wild card.
Guys, if you think we're completely wrong, Fernando Alonso is not going to finish 7th, but rather he's going all the way to the podium, getting 3rd in the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. I think I'm right there with you.
Without any side pods. Let's go.
Jeez.
All right, we'll see ya.
Bye, guys.